they're jealous, and there's a woman who was picking up the jewelry. Okay, so that's the thing. Okay, now you can. Are we still sharing the screen?
I will share it, but I realized, you know, at the beginning of our discussion, after I started recording, the video stopped. So now I realized I was not recording.
Oh.
So now I started recording again.
That's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
Technology, you know. Teething problems.
So
it's not perfect.
Just in brief to recapitulate. Can you tell us in 1 minute or two what we talked about up to now?
Yeah, so what we did was we started with an exercise, giving students an exercise to think in their mind, a scenario, and then ask, who are these people, men or women, and what is the relationship between these people? Basically trying to talk about the fact that images and words go hand in hand, that there's a connection. When you see words, you think of images often, and when you think of images, you think of words. Of course, there's exceptions, people who say, I don't think in images at all. That can be the case. So here's an image that you see on your screen right now. Do you see the left one? Do you see what it reads? You see what it reads?
Yes, they gave us food, baby, humans are so good. And the other body of the elephant with the pineapple in its trunk spells sorry.
Sorry. Yes. And so I thought these two were very, very powerful images that came up right after that incident, especially the sorry one. I thought that was very creatively done and something that you will never forget. So this is how images are used. Now, in that case, that's one word. You can write stories on it. You can, in their news stories around it. It's one word. It's a very, and they used that when they were actually, because they created a petition for that, to criminalize this kind of act, and they use these images as well. So then these images can be further used. So let's go to the next slide.
Yes.
So we've talked about this already. We did draw the princess and talked about how princesses, usually we get the concept of princess from Disney or movies. Let's stop here. Here are some images that changed the way the world looked, okay? We're going to go one after the other in these images. I want to ask you how many, only two students here, but if you've seen these images before and you know what they're about, don't read the text, you can get them. So this one, do you know what that is about?
It kind of says at the bottom.
Yes. I don't know if you can see that, but anyway, so this is one of the, you can scroll that up so I can read that a bit and let them know. This is actually from South Africa, Soweto, okay? It was a picture that got world's attention, a frozen moment in time that showed 13-year-old Hector Peterson dying after being struck down by a policeman's bullet in 1976. Okay, so this is, this is actually starting the rise of this recognition, which actually, it had been going on for a while. This is during the apartheid time. So next image, sorry. Okay, this one, don't read anything. Do you know what that is? That's a very strong image. Soren knows. Yes. You kids. So I remember, and I looked for this image years ago. I listened to this when they were actually doing the story as it was an anniversary of this day. This is the first time after segregation, a young African-American girl was going to school, and look around, the people were so upset. And they were interviewing this young girl on radio. You can actually look that up on NPR. I think they did that story about 10, 15 years ago on radio. And she said people had spat so much on her that she could wring her skirt. And then what they had done, they had brought one of the girls who was screaming at her back into the radio station, and they had interviewed the people and sort of bring them together. And that was really, really a nice interview of bringing people together. But this image remains very strong. It's the first time when they were actually, just looking at that, there's 1,000 stories there, and it tells you, what that girl must have been going through. And then the reason for glasses as well, to not show any emotion or not be afraid of what might happen. Next one, Soren. Okay, this one, Soren must know. Do you kids know?
Vietnam.
Yeah, this is the Vietnam thing. What had happened? The bomb had actually not only burned the houses, that you see the naked girl, it had burned her skin along with her clothes. She now lives in Canada, and I've heard her interviews as well, and they've talked about that. And that image was the one. So here's talking about how they got revolution started. That image was the one that got young people in America saying, this is not right, because we were told that civilians are not being affected. This is just not right. So this photograph made a big impression. One photograph can make a big impression. Okay. And then it also, like, the moment I said it, Soren said Vietnam. These are words and images are connected, especially, collective psyche. Next one, Soren. This one is not very famous, but when I was looking for these pictures, I came up with that. It's not very famous, but it's actually about during Nixon's time, again, the 70s, and there was a shooting at Kent State where there was a peaceful protest that was going on. And this was, again, young people protesting against American troops. I think it was in Cambodia. Is it something like that? Yeah. So it tells you about a time when students were active. It tells you about a time when America had different policies. Still, there's some things to be questioned. It tells you about a time that when people were actually getting together and starting to question the policies of their own government to actually, because it was affecting people they might not have ever even seen. So another one.
Charu, when I was looking on my computer once in my department and looking at this picture because I was preparing for a PR visual communication class, the chair of my department, Dr. Robel, told me, hey, do you see this picture in the background? Do you see those housing facilities? And he was showing me the window where he was living at the time.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Wow.
He said he was there.
Yeah, see, so it's the same thing. Like when you see image of Kennedy's funeral, a lot of the times people are asking, there's so many radio stories done around, where were you when this happened?
Yes.
This one, does anybody know this? You kids are too young, but I'm gonna, Soren would know.
Yes, I think it's in our visual communication book, but I'm sharing just a few chapters from the book with them. So I'm not sure if all these images are there.
Yeah, this is again Vietnam. This was a young monk who lit himself on fire. He was a Buddhist monk. He was basically trying to show that you cannot destroy us. Okay, it's just, and people around him, you can actually go and watch that on YouTube. I actually suggest that discretion, because it's not an easy thing to watch. They will ask you if you were 18 years old or not, because it's a very difficult thing to watch. They've used that in many movies, concept of that. They've actually, a lot of after this, actually, there was a increased interest. 60s had already started, and increased interest in the philosophies of the East. But after all of these images, there was much more interest in philosophies of the East as well. What you saw in this, what you see in this image, is that the people around are so agitated, and he's sitting calmly. It's and I mean, you can actually even read about it on Wikipedia. Next one, sorry. Okay, this one, everyone knows that one, right? And do you know who that girl is?
I use this one all the time, and show her in the National Geographic when she's mature, when they found her again.
Yeah,
5 years.
They did that after September 11th. They went and met her. After September 11th, she was living in a refugee camp. So in her own country.
Ekindra or Gabby, do you know who this was?
I think she's from Afghanistan, I guess.
Yeah.
I saw her pictures many times, but I just kind of don't know her name, actually. But I know this.
She was on the cover of the National Geographic when the war in Afghanistan was done by the Russians.
Mm.
So it was used by America to show the innocence of the people conquered by the Soviets. But then America took their place.
Yeah. And she was a young girl at that time. And they all, what they talked about, and every time they talked about her eyes. All over the world, they talked about her hauntingly empty, dry eyes, because she was a child, and you don't see that. You see this despair in some ways. Yeah, they did that story when they found her. The picture was taken by Steve McCary from Penn State, so I know that. He's a great photographer, Steve McCary. Okay, next one, sorry. All right, so I want to let's go back. I want to talk a little bit about art here. Yeah, that one. So looking at images, there are different schools of thought in how do you look at at art and who is determining. So there's this absolutism idea where the gods are deciding what is beautiful, what is right and not. Individualism, where the person is deciding. Objectivism, I mean, these names actually tell you automatically that the beauty is independent of how we see it, as opposed to beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So that's another school that says there is an objective beauty. And you know where you get those ideas? When you have these videos where they're talking about symmetrical are more beautiful than asymmetrical. Because what they're trying to say is there is a beauty out there which is perfect, which is why, I was reading a paper recently they were talking about comparing East and West, and they were talking about East is known by chaos and is not afraid of chaos and confusion, but the West is actually quite proper and everything is organized. And I noticed that the first time, I remember when I went to Germany, I was like, oh my God, all the houses are like exactly the same, which is an interesting thing. If you guys are interested, read this book called McDonaldization of Society, when everything became quite even. So this kid was actually talking about East versus West, and he was talking about the US, and he said, what I found fascinating was how in the US, everybody has same teeth. Because you all go to the dentist, and it's like there's a certain idea of how teeth are beautiful, and that's like so similar. He says, I just didn't find any flaws because everybody has to have same kind of teeth, which was quite interesting. And I heard the same thing from an Australian woman as well one time. She's like, well, because dentists have such a big job there and they get a lot of money for doing that. And this idea of what beauty is. Where does that come from? That comes from this idea of there's an objective beauty, right? There's this kind of beauty that we all must aspire to. Then there's cultural relativism.
But Charu, in Europe and everything that was afterwards main colony of Great Britain, everything was influenced by the culture and the history studied by the Greek and the Roman world. And they were also obsessed with this balance of proportions. Kalokagathia in Greek was meant beautiful and useful, so
that's a very good point. How cultures transfer their idea of what is beautiful.
And only later, remember that it's in medieval times, after the conquering of the New World, the Spanish brought back these beautiful ideas of the beautiful nature and contorted nature. So we ended up with Baroque.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And the Rococo, styles in architecture, which is the opposite of order.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a very interesting, you guys telling you this. When we're having this discussion, pay attention, and your papers can come out of these concepts. These are concepts to explore, how one culture influenced other, and how did that impact PR, and how did that impact advertising. All of that is related. Very good. And cultural relativism, all of us know. I remember because I've spent some time in different countries. So and I don't know if, again, you kids are young. I think it's 99 or 2000, Miss World, or is it Miss Universe, was from Botswana. And I lived there for some time. So, she looked like an African Cinderella, but that's not how Botswana women are. They're big and large and proud, but this gorgeous girl was not very big, had very similar to European body because, that was considered beautiful. One of the other things, if you notice, is that if you see Miss Universe or Miss World contests from 20 years ago, they used to have what they call a cultural evening, and women would dress in their own country's outfits. They've done away with that. It's a small portion now. You see, when they do evening, women from all cultures are wearing Western gowns, which is what they've standardized how women should dress. basically, by these contests. Biophysiological relativism is, what is beautiful in our culture, and neurological makeup, and what evokes certain kind of beauty in us. And that can be slightly different in different cultures. Eye shape, or texture of the hair, what is considered more beautiful. Okay, sorry, next one. So radio and TV are very rich arts because they combine both words and texts. So radio was interesting because then all of a sudden you could be doing something and you were not reading a magazine, but you could be listening and generating images in your head. Then comes television and you are glued to it. You have images and you can have words. But I remember, and Soren would remember, when we were all concerned about people watching TV and nobody's reading anymore. And then comes the internet. Then we start to say, oh, so now you have a medium where you actually can combine different things. Technically, ideally, media professionals are supposed to combine different aesthetic expressions so that the viewer gets a range of experiences. Okay, they're almost obligated to. My concern is I've almost stopped watching TV. There is so much violence and so much crudeness. Sorry, kids, but there is. I don't know if you notice the difference if you watch some older ones. It's amazing. I've just turned it off because everything is either about conspiracy, police shows, some sort of violence, some what do you call, doctor shows where somebody's dying or something like that. There used to be series of family shows and we knew the families. And that is almost gone. It's almost like, you have this sort of this another kind of drama that has come up and they evoke. If you're interested, there is a rasa theory, and I've written a paper. I don't know if Søren wants, I can send it. It actually, it's an ancient theory from India. It predates Aristotle, and it talks about different sensations in your body that combine to give you the ultimate experience of enjoying an art performance or a piece of art. And the word that we use is called rasa, which literally comes from cuisine or taste. It's the taste in your tongue. The same thing when we say something is delicious, or they say, oh, it's with rasa, okay? And you can say the same thing for experiencing an art form. They say, interesting thing is, nowhere on your body, you can take food, any food you love, put it here, put it on your hand, put it here, nothing. In your tongue, bang. There are juices and there are memories and there's ideas, right? That's the rasa, that's the enjoyment. But there are certain things about that enjoyment. You have to pay attention. If you're not paying attention, you cannot have that enjoyment. It goes for the same in attending a class. I'm slightly being, here being sarcastic, but also it's real. If you're not paying attention, you cannot enjoy what your teacher is saying, because you have to connect the lecture from beginning to end, and you have to come to the lecture over and over again to actually understand, to get the rust of what it is. First thing, you have to be paying attention. Second, your enjoyment of an art piece is dependent on what you already know. So if you know very little, you haven't done your readings, you will not enjoy it. No question. Third, and the most important, and this is a big cultural difference, which I never understood, and then when I did this paper, I understood. You cannot enjoy an art piece, performance, anything, if you are inebriated, if you are under the influence of alcohol or sleepy. So I'd never understood when people went to concerts, why were they taking these cans of beer? Because I'm like, how are you going to enjoy it? Because at some point you will be disconnected from your body, and your body is not going, you can be just going, yay, 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 but it's not that subtle touch of enjoyment has to have you awake, and you will know when, and what rasa is? They say rasa is that, like when you taste something, right before you said, "Ma, the food is great," before you said food is great, you tasted it. And there was a split second and you said, that's rasa, that's fleeting. And you have to be awake. How many times we eat and we don't know what we're eating because we're talking or we're not paying attention? Paying attention is the key. And it's the key in when you're trying to get attention of your viewers, when you're designing a campaign, you are What you're trying to do, you're trying to grab their attention. Sounds, music, images. Okay. And
Okay.
internet is, it combines all this. It's possible to do that.
Yeah, Charu, I wanted to again mention the ancient Greeks because I come
Yeah.
from a country that is very close to Greece,
Yeah.
and I've been there, and that was a magical place, in the year 500 before Christ, because it was a place of philosophers that were listening to the East and to what was important at that time, Northern Africa and Egypt. So they were also referring to or using a term that was called synesthesia. Synesthesia is what you're talking about with Rasa. A combination of all senses that gives you the ultimate sense of things.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, when I'll send you that paper, because they do talk about, they were also, because performance itself was a ritual. It was a ritual, and it was actually performed for what they considered gods who were sitting in the audience. They always said they were performing for an invisible entity who was there, and I forget the name because I can't say the Greek word. And there was a lot of similarity between Greeks and Indian theater. There was a lot of similarity between. In fact, what had happened was after the after Christianity came, they became more word oriented because symbolism and music was taken away from European and Greek theater. It was reduced because first of all, theater was closed for some time. Then it came back again because it wasn't considered holy or religious or anything. So this separation that you see in East and West, because East has a lot of music, and that's why when you see Bollywood, why do you have songs? The interesting thing, if you study it, is you have different kinds of songs. You have a fun song, you have a sad song, you have a happy song, you have a family song. These were to evoke emotions. Bollywood today has become very much like Hollywood, and it's getting more and more boring, actually. But Soren will tell you, because they also grew up with some of the Bollywood movies, right? So they had no genre. It wasn't like a genre film. It wasn't like a comedy or a horror film, because the concept was to combine all emotions. So they were called masala films, like a mixture of spices. So they had like 9 emotions. A good campaign, depending on, I don't want to get too much into that because that's a different topic, but a good campaign can capture audiences from different emotions,
Right.
and do it very ethically.
Right.
Okay. So these are names of some movies that I think you might want to, I'm just suggesting you can watch. The Bang Bang Club came out, I think 6, 7, 8 years ago. I said 6, 7, 8, I don't remember. But it was definitely between 6 and 8. And it's a movie about these South African journalists who were actually taking pictures. You remember that picture of a vulture and an African child next to the vulture? They were taking images of really war-torn regions, and the movie talks about how it affected them emotionally, and one of them committed suicide, one of them was killed and whatnot. So it's a very good film. These are some good films that come and go and we don't know about them. Bang Bang Club. And then there's Without Borders, also very interesting. That movie, I think, went directly to DVD. It's Angelina Jolie and Clive Owen. I think that's what his name. I forget his name. Anyway, so it's a very interesting film because it talks about how Doctors Without Borders work in different countries, and it's very image oriented. Waking Life, I just put there because I was talking about that monk in Vietnam. Waking Life, if you haven't, I think you will enjoy it. It's a film. Which have you watched the Sunset? What's his name? Ethan Hawke and Julie Delpy series, Before Sunrise, Before Sunset.
Yes.
Have you watched those? Okay, so they use the same characters here, but what they did was they use a technique where they actually shoot the film with real people, then they draw over it, so it looks like it's a moving cartoon. But it's a very interesting film because it talks only about philosophy, and it combines East and West, and it's really interesting. You won't stop watching it. And one of the images they used there was the image. They talk about it, the image of the monk, and I wanted to bring that up too. Okay.
Should I move?
Sorry. So very quickly, because I don't know how much time we have, I want to talk about a few things here. So functions of art, when we're using that, they can be outer directed and inner directed. Okay, you have to keep that in mind when you're designing campaigns. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to have them take actions? Are you trying to have them change their attitudes? You know, all of those things. So you need to ask yourselves. So let's go next one.
Yeah, and I want to remind you that I have some questions from the students for you.
Okay, great. So shall I just continue? Well, maybe I should leave this. I want to show you another image, and then I don't know how much time we have.
Well, we have time. I mean,
Okay.
I
Because
don't want to keep you more than an hour, but if you have the time, we can stay 10 more minutes.
Okay, 10 more minutes is not a problem. Okay, so I'm just gonna, so outer-directed tasks are we are refining society and we are using culture by offering the ideal. What's the highest ideal? What's the highest level we can be? How compassionate can we be? How kind can we be? Can we be kind towards nature? A lot of the times, art is doing that in different ways. Okay, that is what art can do, this idea, our directed, you know, like it creates values and meaning. So what's going on in the US right now, I will talk about BLM, what's going on in the US right now. Imagine it's the second wave of this movement. The first one started in the 60s and got people civil rights. And I remember watching a documentary that was done by Spielberg, and it was about um, uh, soldiers in World War II who were African American. They were not citizens, but they were soldiers for the US. Okay. Similarly, what people don't know is, in World War II, I would say close to, I don't know, I don't want to say, it's a huge number of Indian soldiers that fought for the British, and they had no rights back home. And they had like no, what do you call, memorial set up for them, nothing. England didn't even acknowledge them. You get a brief whiff of it when you see that movie, The English Patient, and you see one Indian guy there, an English patient, all right, because that's what they're talking about. They just did Dunkirk 2-3 years ago, remember? And people talked a lot about that. They whitewashed it. There are no Indian soldiers in there. It's impossible that there weren't any. Okay, so these are things, like art can actually, so art, when I say direct and it can take away, there was a movie that came out called U-571, I think that's what it's called. It came out again in 2000. And it's about a submarine in World War II that the Brits went and saved, I think. I don't remember the whole plot. But Hollywood showed it like the Americans went and saved it. Okay, so they were interviewing people who were still alive at that time in 2000, who actually were part of that operation. And these old people were like, it doesn't matter, let someone make a movie, we're dying anyway, like we don't know, we're old. They didn't care. But the point is that movie becomes more popular, and unless somebody is really willing to do research, they wouldn't know. That becomes a part of the truth. So you have to be very careful with the images and the truth and what you're showing. That's very important. That's the ethical part. Okay, so next one. So I'll go very quickly over this. This is outer director's task. It is see into the present to reveal a world. You use the images to show what the world is like. One of the tasks is to things that we generally ignore. We look at them and we make it a cultural symbol. Okay, and you can name a lot of things. Like, for example, I give the example here in the 70s, they started to make these shows. I think it was like Three's a Company. There was another one, Penny Marshall did a show, right? Penny Marshall and another one. And these were shows that we ourselves read about in books, because we didn't watch these shows. But what was happening at the time? It was both a little before women's movement. Around that time, it was talking about the times, already preparing people or showing some things that are going on in the culture. Because, Three's a Company was a big show where a guy and girls were living as roommates. That wasn't happening at that time. These are things, and that was changing culture. So I think that's very important. I think in 2006, didn't they do a show where Gina Davis was the president, was a woman president? They're again doing the same thing. They're trying to change things already. And then, of course, Hillary Clinton came like 10 years later, but I mean, in that position or close to it. But they were already setting that. So you can do that. You can actually, art can actually take what we have, reveal something new, ask you to imagine a new world, And that's almost like asking people to expand their imagination. One of the negative sides of that is, and Soren would know about this. This is with regards to NUICO, which is a New World Information Order. When in the 60s and 70s, when a lot of countries were newly independent, America, especially America, but also I think part of it, the US was also in, UK was part of it, but no other country could take as a big role because America had the biggest culture industry, biggest media industry. Their idea was, if we expose the world to American culture, they will leave their traditional culture and become like us. And worlds were bombarded with American television. And I remember I didn't grow up with any because India had a block on foreign programming. So we didn't grow up with any. But I was quite young when I moved to Africa. And guess what? In South Africa, they were watching MacGyver. You know, they were watching MacGyver and Dallas. I mean, they were old shows by that time, but they were still watching them because these were the ones they would get. We would get some free shows, and the ones that we were allowed to watch were I Love Lucy, like black and white, like really old ones, because the government thought this is not that culturally oppressive. It's a family show. And the other one that we were watching was black and white Star Trek, like you guys were watching here, probably the new ones, and we were watching really old ones. So that's the other thing. Movies we didn't get. We used to get movies like 5 years after they were released in the US, if we got them. The whole point was to reduce the cultural impact. But a lot of countries didn't have that choice. Why? Because they didn't have their own programming. They didn't have their own industry.
Charu, let me mention something to you.
Yeah.
I lived through an anti-communist revolution in 1989, and
Yeah.
afterwards, in the first years, in '97, I worked for the Ministry of Culture of Romania in international relations, and I knew firsthand that the National Commission of Audiovisual had to negotiate with whoever Romania had interests, economic interests with, meaning there was a negotiation how much, what was the percentage of national television broadcasting, European Union television broadcasting, and American television.
Wow.
And there were established percentages per week. So these were the forces, economic forces that we needed, and they were imposing on us how much we will show to the people.
Yeah. And countries like France, I think, pushed back because they had a bit of their own domestic industry, but there were very few countries without. So today, if you go to Africa, it's been so colonized because young girls are not wearing their African outfits that are gorgeous and, more importantly, are better for the climate wise. You know, you're not supposed to wear tight fitting clothes in countries that are hot. It doesn't make sense. I've seen the same change in Fiji, where, over a period of few years, both Fijian and Indo-Fijian girls who used to wear their own outfits start to wear, the tight outfits and skirts and, all of that, because Fiji didn't have television until 1991. And guess, next 20 years, they switched everything, right? So that's what was happening. There was something else I wanted to tell you when you were talking about how much they watch. Oh yeah, in Fiji, when I was interviewing the CEO of Fiji Television, and they were showing Pussycat Dolls at 7 p.m. Okay, I don't know much about these bands and all, but that was horrible. I thought this is not good for young kids. Families are having dinner at that time, and then they're watching TV sometimes. So I asked him, I said, why do you show this? And it's not even that good. He said, he was Canadian, by the way, and he said, when these countries go to buy programs, there are these fairs. They said, we have to buy programs in packages. We cannot simply say we want this, this, or this. They have a package. So they have to buy 7 programs. Out of those 7 programs, 2 are really successful ones in the US. 2 are okay. And then 2 or 3 are really bad ones, because they want to make money off of those bad ones as well. So then he said, when we pay for them, then we have to. We think, okay, we'll get some advertising money. So the only thing they're thinking is finances. They're not thinking the cultural impact. And therefore, what do you get? You get Fijian girls. Not a single Fijian girl drew a girl with, when I said princess, not a single Fijian girl drew a princess with dark skin. And when we asked them, can you be a princess? She said, no, I'm too dark to be a princess. I wanted to say, that's Fijian princesses are like you. But they didn't have that concept because they had no home industry. Soren, you were going to say something.
So, Charu, I wanted to kind of wrap up what you started with. You started with the fact that kind of every individual, and then as a nation, as a culture, we have some kind of imaginary, a perception that was grown or embedded in our minds because of the discussions that we have with the family, with the people in the city where we live, or the village, and then in the country if there's a better mass communication system. But then we can be moved into a different imaginary perception of things if we are, under cultural imperialism, right? So that can be changed. I have seen it before. Most of the times when the Iraqis, I remember after 9/11, where they were talking about, they came and they bombed some democracy into us, and then what did they bring us? The culture of blue jeans. So they it was this idea of together with this kind of liberation, we were told what to watch, how to dress, what to do, and then we were left kind of on our own.
Yeah.
So it's complicated. Most of the times it comes with a cultural conquering of a certain population. In my country, in Romania, people, it's eerie how they are conquered by the image of America. And they listen to actually the extreme right ideas from the United States nowadays, because it comes through television unfiltered, and they see mostly the shows brought through the embassy that talk about how good the president is, and what were the how the economy was on its best. And I saw now in disbelief that people that I know or relatives of mine post on Facebook how inappropriate these movements for the rights of certain minorities in the United States are. They are asking for something for free and they are looting because they don't work. Because that's how the perception is through the American news, American movies, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and that's one thing. I remember reading somewhere in one of the papers where this guy said, oh, well, they have criminalized certain races, and what they do is they show, it says, almost looks like it's the same picture they're showing all the time, and they say, oh, this person is accused, this person is accused. It's almost the same picture. It's usually an African American guy or somebody who's a minority, like, okay, they are. And the thing is that in the news, a lot of the times they would use mugshots. I stayed in the US such a long time, but for the last 4 years, I stopped watching TV because it became so repetitive. It was so repetitive, including shows, and so I used to just listen to NPR and BBC. Not the best if you're teaching media, but yeah, because it was so repetitive. And because we are media scholars, I would notice that all the time, like it's just they're talking about the same thing over and over again. Okay, let me just go quickly. I think we can skip 2 slides. Let's see.
Yes.
There are inner directed tasks, which is basically, we can go to the next one. Inner directed tasks, which is, liberate your imagination. Magic realism is a good example. Do you know what magic realism is, kids? Have you ever watched, I don't know, Como agua por chocolate, like water for chocolate? Yeah.
Right.
Or what's his name? Garcia Marquez is the one who started it.
The Latin American authors were en vogue at the fall of communism in Romania. At the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s, we were reading a lot of Marquez and Borges and others.
Basically telling you that you had the power to free yourself from here. An example that I used to give, would be a little old for you kids, is that I used to always say it's like MacGyver. You got into trouble and then you can come out with this imagination. You can free yourself with that. And art can definitely do that. Art can definitely do that. and it's used oftentimes in campaigns. It's often used in PR, both good and negative ways, but it's used oftentimes. And that can do that. It can evoke sympathy, empathy, vice versa, hatred, and anything, like we're talking about liberating imagination here. But I say at the bottom here, it's very important, if we are putting ourselves in other people's shoes, that at some point we have to have a conversation with ourselves before attitudes change. That is a very important process. It takes a long time. It can take years. It can come because your family tells you to, whatnot. But there has to be, at some point, a conscious decision of when you change your attitudes. And art plays a big role in that.
Charu,
Yes.
let me ask you something,
Yeah.
because you see, little by little, we were faced with the emergence of a new powerhouse, economic powerhouse in the world that is kind of surpassing America. I'm talking about China.
I know.
And China is at the border with India. And you
Yeah.
are the advocate of this magic realism and, contorted forms and loose dresses because it's hot and so on and so forth. But the Chinese are actually appropriating things that were solid with the Western world: order, militarizing, uh, hard work, and then you will see, propagation of wealth. But they're still keeping this idea that the government has to control everything. And as a culture, they are oriented towards the family, and the group is more important than the individual, which is totally different than the West, which is more, concentrated towards the wealth of the individual and the family rather than the nation, as we can see it now. Uh, but look, the Chinese are so much different than the Indians. Uh,
Yeah, but I think it has to do with communism. Well, they are slight. Okay, I don't want to, because these are sweeping statements, so I don't want to say that. Uh, in Yeah, they have this idea of one Chinese civilization, and then that's not. I mean, but they're coming from communism standpoint too. Where party is more important than
but following in many of these Asian countries like North Korea, the same in China for a period of time when they were cleansing their country at the time of Mao.
Yeah,
But they were following on a psyche of the population in which a god can be transmuted into the leader.
yeah, and that's exactly what they've done. Yeah, yeah. I remember talking to someone, which it's hard for us to imagine, that people couldn't share emotions openly without using the name of Mao. Like it has to be somehow there, almost like when, like by God kind of thing. Like that's how the name was evoked, almost with a sense of reverence and divinity, which is yeah, very interesting. I don't know enough, but I've been reading enough on social media and a lot of things about what might happen with China, because it's like this, it's like there's a pressure coming from within, and it's yeah, and it's a huge country, and you know it takes time, but it can happen. And so
And also, it's interesting to see how some leaders, because of the example of the American president, are
yeah,
kind of big countries. In India, Modi; in Brazil, what's his name? They are following the example of America, saying, minorities should be put in their place.
I'm
And
actually, I have something here, because along with that, because I will step away about the minority part, because one of the articles that I sent you guys is basically about that, how international media has created narrative about Modi, and it's not true, because I've been following that. It's not true, and I will explain that, because I've got images here, and I wanted to show that, because how then images and memes travel into other countries, and they sort of just assume. See, so one thing I will talk about here is, uh, and I studied in the US, so I absorbed this, and it took me some time to actually question it and get rid of it, because it didn't gel with the way I grew up. I had no concept of the fact that I was a majority. No concept. I had no concept of the fact that I had a race, because Indian is not a race. We are a mixed people. And you can have, in the same people, you can have a dark person and a light person. So we don't have a race. I've never understood that. Okay, so it's very interesting. So me, first time, I did experience some of that in Botswana, where they used to call me white, because I was in Africa, they used to call me white, which is quite interesting. They used the word called lekhoa, and I didn't understand anything. I was too young at that time. And then when I moved to the US, at every form, they ask you race. They ask, but these days, because I'm applying for grants and everything all over the place, do you know what they ask you in forms? Race, gender, sexual orientation, religion. They're asking everything. You know, whether I'm transgender or not, you know, how do I identify myself? Whether I was born a woman, do I identify? I'm amazed at what, and this is not China or other countries. These are Western countries, Australia, UK, US, Norway. Okay, this is a trend. This is very interesting. For me, when I grew up, we just had to have our name. I don't even remember if we had to put our religion, because our names tell our religions most of the times, you know? So we didn't. So the race for the first time was in the US. And now I'm talking about the 90s and the 2000s. So in the US, they didn't know the difference between the Orientals and Asians or Indians. And so we used to have this one thing, Asian, where they used to have Chinese and North Korean, but I didn't know where to put myself. Now they have Indian separate. They didn't at that time. Okay, so these are things that were quite interesting for me to see. So that's one thing, minority and majority. This concept that majority is automatically, by definition, oppressive, I have a problem with. Major problem with that. Over recently, I can say I'm a Hindu and all of that. We didn't even grow up with a religion idea. It's one of the most liberal faiths there is. So I didn't grow up with this idea that I'm a Hindu, although now I definitely say that. And I say that because I've traveled all over the world. Most of the world has been converted to Christianity or Islam. Most of the times by violence, which nobody talks about today. Okay, so for me, it was quite interesting because I came from that, and I was like, well, and also one of the other things, we don't have Sunday schools or anything. The only thing we learn at home is you have to be ethical, kind, caring, avoid hurting animals, because when trying to be vegetarian, stuff like that. No alcohol, probably no intimate relationships before you get married, and all of those things. Those were important. Nobody ever told me I was a Hindu, ever. I got to say that for the first time when I left India, and somebody asked me. I was like, oh yeah, okay, it's Hinduism. They're like, but that's an anglicization. I was like, oh yeah, there's another word, Sanatan Dharma. I don't, like, we were kids, very urbanized, very anglicized. But the thing is that this thing about, so as a Hindu, because we're the majority, I get the least benefits in the country. Just automatically, the least benefits. There are Muslim schools, there are Muslim universities. There's no particularly Hindu university. Now they're building them, and so Modi is bad guy. We didn't have any. I, as a woman, as a Hindu, could not go into, I'll consider the general category. My parents were refugees from Pakistan, my grandparents, okay? We didn't get any special scholarships. So these are things that international narratives don't do a very good job when they transfer this idea that majority is always oppressive. That's not right either. But I'm going to talk to you about that because I've got an image here to show.
Yes. Okay. So are we done with the slides?
Yeah, let's just do that. Just because after this, there's images, I think.
Exactly.
There's one image that I really want to show because that goes with okay, this is an image where I wanted to talk about, this is Tiananmen Square. Kids, you wouldn't know again. Some of the Chinese kids don't know. So this is from 1989. And this is an image that even today evokes this fear, and there are novels written about it, and whatnot. A man standing in front of a tanker saying, you better kill me, and I don't, you've already killed me, and I'd rather. And the thing is, the tank moves, and the man moves with the tank because the man said, kill me now. And this became a very, very prominent image. Okay, I think I have one or two other images about fear. We can just go. That's the atomic bomb, right? This is, again, evokes that.
High atomic bomb. It sounded like an introduction. This is Rebecca. This is the atomic bomb.
This is the atomic bomb. Yes, you're right. High atomic bomb. I mean, those images are important because they evoke a sense of, a time, fear, Tell us what that was associated with. I remember watching a documentary on, um, uh, you know, Pearl Harbor and Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Interestingly, because I grew up in India, I didn't know much about Pearl Harbor, but I knew about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. When I came to the US, a lot of US kids didn't know about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They all knew about Pearl Harbor. Because so you guys now know, right? Gabby and you know that, what happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, US dropped the bomb. What I remember from that is when I was a kid, I watched a documentary. They took images of a place where they dropped the bomb. There was a man sitting there. After the bomb, the heat generated was so much that he melted. And I never forgot that, so the images can be so powerful. I wanted to talk a bit about Arab Spring, Black Lives Matter, COVID-19, COVID fair. I remember I was in the US when that was going on and everybody was, jokes and memes about it. I think images can bring about changes in a viewpoint. It becomes like seeing is believing. But how do we trust images in a world where images can be altered? That's also very important. When first they started to work with Photoshop, they started to say, I don't know if this image is altered. Nowadays on Twitter, I think you have a way, I'm not that tech savvy, but you can actually figure out by pixels if the picture was used somewhere else, if it's an old photograph. So people are starting to do that to figure out no fake news and whatnot. But images can be altered. Let's look at another one. Let's go another one because I talked about this already. Okay, this is the image. I want you to watch this image. This came after BLM that's going on. So somebody made this for India, and I will talk about that. Can you, other than the bad spellings, can you see what's happening?
Yes.
So this is, I think it's an Indian American Muslim Council or Indian Muslim Council or whatever. They do this. So now let me explain something here. First of all, there's a spelling mistake. You can see that. There should be an E after breathe. We can't breathe. So what they're doing is they're taking George Floyd's image and bringing here, and they're done Muslim, and then that is not enough. That is to Dalit because that's a caste system thing. They want to show that. Who is up there? Hindutva fascism. I'm one of them. And they're showing these people in khaki pants who are called RSS. It's Rashtriya Swayamsevak. They're the biggest volunteer organization in the world. In the world. The only thing is they take pride in being Hindus. And when they go out and help, they don't care about whether it's Muslim or Dalit or Christian. They don't care. You can go check it out in all the floods and all of they're the first people there. Many of them choose not to get married because or have bank accounts because this is our dedication to our country. Okay? But that's not how they are shown outside in the world. If you want, then you can actually research, but nobody does that. We go by these images, right? Then you see the trident. That's a symbol of one of our gods. It's not a weapon. They're showing it here as a weapon. What are people going to? It's not a weapon. It has symbology. It's Trinity and whatnot. I don't know everything. I'm an urbanized Indian, but all of these things: lynching, beef ban, CAA, NRC, which is 2-page document that nobody read and created riots. And then they are comparing Black lives to Muslim lives or Dalit lives. Considering how much you know about India or you don't know about India, why are they not comparable? Why are Black lives are not comparable to Muslims in India? Or even Dalits, we can talk about that.
I don't know. Kindra,
Muslims were invaders. Blacks were not invaders.
Well, I think I feel like it is different, but the form is kind of similar. That's how I view, like caste versus the racism things. I mean, the concepts is kind of similar, but the view is different. I mean, the caste system in Asia, like we Nepal have also caste systems, in India, of course. So they are like, I think it's related with group.
So let me ask you this. Do you know that there are Dalit gods and there were Dalit kings? Did you know that?
No.
Yeah. You see,
So
this is what I'm saying. So there's narratives created. I don't want to get too much into it because it's too complicated. You want, you can send me an email and I can tell you more about it. But there are so many levels. I'm not saying that at some point oppression wasn't and that government hasn't taken care of it. It's too complicated, all of that. But especially with Muslims, you can't. Muslims came as invaders. Blacks were drawn, pulled out of their countries and given nothing. Muslims ruled over India for about 150 years, during which there
yeah,
were a lot of forcible conversions. Many forcible conversions. A good portion of the mosques are built upon broken temples. They were broken. Today, even now, you can go and see it. But nobody talks about that. I never used to talk about these things until I started to say, there's something systemically wrong with this. And we just assume because they're a minority, there's this thing. No, in fact, it's like I don't know. I could, that's a complicated issue. But why I wanted to bring this up is because I wanted to say this is not correct. And so what? Anyway, if you want, we can discuss more whether Gabby or I forget I can't say your name.
Ikindra.
Ikindra.
Yes.
And if you want, we can talk about more about that. But I want to talk about some other things here. So I wanted to show that image because they're trying to transfer that, and sometimes it doesn't work. You cannot. So there's another article, Surin, I'll send that to you. That was beautifully written. They're talking about Indian Americans, Hindu Americans, and how they can align with Black Americans. That's beautifully written. They're talking about how the histories are similar and how we need to understand Black lives. That's an in-depth article with a lot of links, and I can send you that if you're interested. There, I understand. But to say that Hindus are actually oppressing Muslims, no, because all the people who are Muslims were actually Hindus and they were forcibly converted. I mean, there's so many stories of how they were converted on knife points, So that's one thing. Some other happened as well. In fact, a lot of the times what happened was some king would convert and an entire village would convert because it was convenient. The same way Christianity happened. It's because it was beneficial for you to be the same religion of the king. But anyway, I want to read the first tweet here. I actually asked this gentleman before I could read his tweet. He's written books, like he writes satire, really funny guy. But this is what he wrote after that. Now read the above one. There's one tweet this. So I want to read this. Convey to your Black friends that in coming days there will be an argument. American gave Blacks opportunities that they squandered. Look how well Asians have done. And Black leaders may not know the correct response to this. And the Asians out there will offer their solidarity to the Blacks, but will not reveal the correct response to them. The fact is that those Asians who do well in the US are whites in the places they come from. Their ancestors got a head start because they had their knee on someone's neck, which a journalist, as you can see by his name, converted to Christianity is writing. Okay, so let's look at the next one. I'm saying this because words matter. It's very important to convey a certain kind in the proper image and context. So the next one is the first tweet from. Everyone has a story to tell about the struggles of their parents and their sacrifices for their children. It's something they learned from their parents, our grandparents, who must have struggled even more to ensure their children have lived a good life. Next then. And I never saw tears in my father's eyes, and I know now all that he has gone through in his life, or nor that what he has gone through in his life, mostly on his bicycle. Listen to this, mostly on his bicycle, I must say. When I knew better, I thought that all these struggles had eroded my father's will to enjoy life. How wrong I was. Whose neck, whose knee? He's talking about middle-class people who are just regular Hindus. They were not like putting their knee on someone's neck and rose up. I know this because my grandparents were refugees. They dropped everything from their homes to jewelry and everything. So we weren't oppressing anybody. It's a very different thing from what Blacks have gone through. The systemic. It's not saying that you are right or not. What I'm trying to talk about is it's very important when you're doing an image, putting it in another context that people know. And Ikendra is from Nepal, and he's probably from Hindu community, but doesn't know because that's been given to you. And the reason I'm talking about it is because all over the world, I've heard only one narrative. And nobody talks about the fact that if you are in any system or faith system that tells you there's a difference between believers and non-believers, that's the biggest caste system there is. That one set of people can get into heaven and the other can't. There can't be a bigger caste system than that. You know, and I think those things are important, but we've never been told to think in those terms.
Right. Charu,
Yeah.
these are complicated and specific, cultural, political issues that I think.
Yeah. We can stop.
Beyond.
I want to go to your questions towards the end.
It's just that I promised someone that I will be in another Zoom call at 10:30, but I can be late a few minutes.
No, that's okay.
I wanted to give it. I had questions. I asked the students last night to give me questions, so there were many questions here. It's just that maybe we can keep the dialogue open, and if they choose to write to you to ask some questions, would you write back?
I will try my best. I will give you another email. I'll send you that one. This email is getting blocked for some reason, so I'll send you another email, okay? Or no, you can send it this one. It should work for some days.
And I was thinking maybe, to give the students a voice here, maybe they can ask one of their questions.
I just want to say one thing to summarize this. I want to talk about stereotyping. When we started with the article, with the story, stereotyping of gender, roles, and relationship between people. Visual comm is not just about images. It can also be about words. Words and images go hand in hand. And as Soren did a very good job of summarizing, you have individual, then you have culture, then you have international, and then there can be an overlap. And sometimes that overlap is correct and right, and sometimes that is out of the context. And knowledge is very important. Okay, go ahead, Soren.
Okay, so Ekindra, Gabby, did you want to ask a question?
I did have a question, but I don't have it pulled up. I'm trying to get it pulled up here on my phone.
Oh, I have them printed, so I can ask the question for you. Did you want the first or the second?
You can do the first one of mine.
Okay, so she's asking, Charu, and let me get out of the sharing so we don't get distracted. She's asking, as an expert in visual and textual aspects of international and intercultural communication, what are the essentials for public relation professionals when communicating across cultures?
Okay, so there are several books about it. One of the things very important for you to understand is one thing that works in almost every culture, and then there's some modifications, is homophily. Have you heard of that term, homophily? You need to evoke a feeling of connection between the one who's giving the message and the one who's getting the message. Because we listen more to people who are like us, right? And that's why, when they're showing these ads of somebody buying toothpaste, they will have a coat, because automatically we believe that they talk so nicely and they're also a doctor and they're telling us to use this best toothpaste, something like that. But that homophily is very important. Heterophily, which is a difference from the one who's giving the message as opposed to the one who's getting the message, comes where people are in power. And in some cultures, it's important. You like to get a message from either a boss or a mother or somebody who's an authority. You need to keep those things in mind. Which culture, what would work? In some cultures, I know that in Indian culture probably, and maybe in African American too, that if grandmother is giving wisdom or grandfather, you ought to listen, right? You just pay attention, especially if it's told in the form of a story. So I think those things are very important to understand. Which culture are we presenting that in? One example I'll give you, it's not the best example, but was that, Palmolive, Colgate Palmolive used to have special ads for India. So rural areas in India, and I think, I know that in Middle East, one of my students came and told me they do the same in Middle East as well. Rural people in India would use these special sticks. They were like tree twigs that were sort of medicinal by nature, and they would use them as toothbrushes. So they didn't use toothbrushes and they didn't use toothpaste, but they also used a mixture of spices, which was very good to keep your teeth clean. We've been doing it for centuries. So when I was a kid, I didn't understand. There was a Colgate Palmolive ad, and it would show a very big burly man, and it would show a black powder on his hands, and it would say, oh, it can be very harsh on your gums. here, take the Palmolive powder, tooth powder. I bet you've never heard of a tooth powder anywhere else. They sold tooth powder only in India because we had our tooth powders. With that ad, they were trying to replace that people should buy tooth powder rather than manjan, which was the spices, combination of spices that people have been using for centuries. All right. So what are they doing? They're taking their own product. Not a good example. They're taking their own product. They're finding a flaw with the local product, and then they're imposing their product. Not a good idea, but you see what I'm saying? So,
but I'm sure that they were doing this because they were getting statistics that people were not responding to their marketing.
Yes, yes.
So
and also, very good. Also that people were not buying toothbrushes and toothpastes. That they were buying the manjan, which is cheaper and comes in a small packet. And yeah. And so this tooth powder used to come in, it was fluoride and everything, used to come in a tin box when I was a kid. And it took me years to understand it. When I was a kid, I was like, why, I don't use that powder. Why do they have this ad? That ad was for rural Indians.
Okay. Okay, Gabby, did you want to ask anything else?
That was really my main question that I wanted to ask, so I'm good.
Okay, Ekindra, do you want me to ask your question?
I have a question, so I can't read it.
Okay.
So I have two questions, but I just want to ask one only. So I don't know if it's considered to your field or not, but I'm just going to ask that. The important elements of visual communication are color affect our emotion and feelings. And it can use to shape human behavior during the COVID-19. The virus image has been present in a different color and perspective. As a research, and research shows that a lot of people suffering from mental health issue because of COVID-19. Do you think because of the COVID-19 image, color, and perspective have contribution to a mental health issues?
Read the last line again. It wasn't clear.
It's like, is there any contribution to a mental health issue just because of this COVID-19 image?
Oh, so
that kind of purplish color.
Yeah, I mean, whenever we see colors, like it's kind of like scary. They put a different color there and then make a different kind of
the fierce colors.
Yes,
okay,
yes.
Okay.
So does this have any kind of impact on mental health issues? Because I realized that when I see this first time, like going through this kind of fearness when I see this. I never saw this image before. But when I see this, I feel like I kind of scare. I mean, that's a dangerous virus. I mean, it's not only on when I read the news, even when I see these pictures and with this, like kind of scary image, and it just like impact on my mind. Oh, this is kind of scary. Like I feel like kind of I'm thinking when people talk about coronavirus, and all of a sudden it's my mind goes the virus, the color, the dangerousness. I mean, so is there any impact?
So I think collective.
Something like that.
Like, oh God.
Yes,
oh God.
yes, exactly. Yeah.
Scary, I know.
It looks.
Yeah. I wanted to say it should be like a foosball, but I would never look at the foosballs again the same way, or the koosh balls that were in the 90s. I would never look at them same again. But I think all right, that's a good question. So collective imagery. So there's several things happening there. First, it is being broadcasted to everybody. Okay, so it's collective. Second, it's being talked about all the time. Third, you're not just getting it just through television, you get it through social media, Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, everything. So you're sort of immersing in that. Can it have an impact on mental issues? Absolutely. But you have to understand the mental state of the people who are receiving it also. that also. Giving an example, and Soren, maybe you can tell me about this, is that September 11, as I told you, I didn't have television the last few years I was there. I didn't. And I remember downloading an image on computer of the Twin Towers falling down and decided not to get cable again because they were showing that on every TV screen.
Right.
And I could see, I was a student myself, but I was also teaching, and I could see what my students were going through. Like, you know, like this, like it was, we would talk about it in class. There was a sense of fear. And a week later, we heard big thud in our neighborhood, and we were all scared, and we came out. What had happened was a parking lot had broken, like the roof had come down. But all of us, because we were in that state. So can this happen collectively? The problem is not just that, oh, they have this coloring code, but it's the repeated repetition of it constantly. And yes, it is an alert, but people would say it's the same thing about security alerts. Soren, would you say that when security alert, it was the same thing, right? When they have, you know, code blue and orange, code red,
right,
it's the
right,
same thing. And it sort of puts fear in you. And there is definitely a thing about mental health, but I think it would be different for people, say, in senior citizen homes, as opposed to people who are from other countries, as opposed to people who are living alone, as opposed to people who are living with families. You know, like that can vary. And the most important thing, what is your actual state of mental health? You know, if you're not emotionally stable, it can be difficult.
Yeah, in Nepal, there is like there's just like a 5,000 cases so far, and then 16 people die. But guess what? There is a people suiciding. Is 1,200 people are suiciding just because
Oh my God.
fear of coronavirus.
Yeah, the
So it's just kind of like you know, I feel like it's the hidden side, the mental issues became worse than, you know, the actual, you know,
So as a
cases.
researcher, I'll tell you something. You have a point, but as a researcher, I would say that you cannot say anything clearly unless you've studied it, because it could be definitely, there's no question about the fact that it creates a collective fear. But why only 12,000, right? Sorry, 1,200, sorry.
1,200.
But I mean, nobody should commit suicide. But what I'm trying to say is, why only that? Why not more? Because you see what I'm saying? So if there is something about those people as well, maybe their current state, maybe somebody who's going through a divorce, maybe somebody is losing someone.
Yeah, there is
combined.
other lurking, yeah.
And this could be a trigger. So as I'm talking as a researcher, generally I would say definitely affects. But as a researcher, you can only be sure when you've actually looked at all the variables and studied it.
Yeah, I wanted to mention this. I don't know if you saw that there was like a commercial when people at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic were not getting it, how dangerous it can be, because the doctors, my cat is restless. So you see.
Oh, I can see her now. Oh, gorgeous.
So they were saying people don't get it because it's a virus, it's microscopic. So they said they made a small video in which those balls that you saw, you know, like the individual cell of the coronavirus that looks like a bounce ball, were bouncing on the streets, and they were the size of humans, you know, in kind of an enhanced reality image. So would you be scared if you saw them bouncing down the street and really pushing you away? You know, so that was the top of the scare image. And look, actually the statistics are nowadays that there's a second wave.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't want, because I'm one of those people, I've heard so much. I've actually stopped myself again from news, and I do that on purpose. Every few weeks I just block it because it's
That's what I did.
Yeah, it's, and not just with COVID or BLM, which was so painful, and it's because news has become like they think only negative is news, and it's 90% negative. So it's very, very difficult because you feel helpless to do anything. I did a study, it was Maya's, one of the studies that we did when there was earthquakes in Japan, and we talked to young children. They were between 8 and 14 years of age. Okay, so yeah, we should stop quickly. So 8 to 14 years of age, and we asked them, where did they get the information? How did they learn about earthquakes? How did they feel? And there was, we used this participant drawn images. We were making them draw images. And the students said, these real kids, they said that they were worried about the children in Japan. And they wanted to know from the news what happened, because Sweden has a special program for children news. It's called children's news. So children are the journalists, and they're like, but they never came back and told us what happened to these children. Did they live? Did they have the house? So one of the things about news is, the problem with news is, it doesn't necessarily go back and do stories in depth. And it is so busy with ratings that it gives you little pieces of everything. And because it is busy with ratings, and because these things are hard to capture. If you watch CNN, one of the assignments I used to give my students was to watch CNN and just do an experiment of watch it the different hours, 3-4 days together, and see how much is repeated. They repeat the same news over and over again. We don't really need 24-hour news channels. God forbid something happens, then, you can have that and whatnot, but we don't.
Yes, but they need your attention all day long, because in between the snippets of news, they will put marketing.
Yeah, exactly.
That's their source of income.
Right. It's like one of my professors used to say, whoever thought journalists were selling news, you were wrong. They're selling advertising.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for this discussion. Sorry about the mishap at the beginning, but I think we covered more than an hour, even when we started recording. So thank you very much to Dr. Uppal. Thank you very much to you, Ekindra and Gabi.
Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you, Gabi and Ekindra. Thank you for showing up early in the morning.
Nice to talk to you.
We should all greet each other with peace to you, because we don't know the future.
I know. May everything go peacefully.
Okay. Everything. If you have anything else to send to me to share with the students, please share, Charu. If you have that email that maybe the students can direct some questions to you and you're willing to answer, please let me know.
They can send me to this one. I'll clear some of it. Yeah.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you. Namaste, Charu.
Namaste. Thank you. Bye, Gabi. Thanks for coming.
Bye, Dr. Nastasia.
Bye.